Okay, UConn football season has come to an end here, and we're recapping the 2024 season here with Graham Chamberlain of Storrs Central. He knows great coverage. So, Graham, thanks so much for hopping on.
Of course, thanks for having me. My first time on this kind of scoreboard pod. It's a big
It, w-
moment.
it won't be the last, so we'll
Mm.
we'll be sure we have you on more. But I mean, let's start with this. I mean, I think this UConn season had to at least meet the best expectations I think people had for this season, if not, well exceed them. What was your kind of overall reaction to how this season played out?
I mean, I think it met the expectations. Yeah. I mean, I think, a lot of people inside the UConn football world were like, we like minimum seven.
Yeah.
Like seven's got to be that floor. And, coming into the year, we weren't exactly sure what to make of the schedule because you had some teams like Georgia State, you had teams like UAB.
Yeah.
And it's like, they struggled a bit last year. They had a huge, portal overhaul for both of them. Same with FAU, right? Like these teams, like we didn't
Mhm.
know what to really expect. And fortunately for UConn, they were worse than expected, right? So that helps a lot. And UConn was better. And you take out that first game against Maryland, which I think they play that game again at any point in the season. It's not going to be
50-7,
a
yeah.
50-7 loss. I'm not saying that they would win, but I was just saying, it wouldn't have been
Right,
as
yeah.
bad as that. Uh, so I think what would have made it even better, like if you could have snagged one of those games, if you could have got the game against Duke, you could have got Wake Forest.
Yeah.
Ideally, Syracuse, that game's always important, regardless of whether or not the Orange are good. That would have really made it like an A+ season.
Yeah.
But, eight regular season wins, 9 wins with the bowl, a great bowl showing at Fenway from the fans. Uh, it's hard to really find a lot of faults.
Yeah. No, I think the turning point for me this year was in that Duke game. They're down, I think it was 17-0.
Yep.
And you start to think like, oh, here we go again. They had the Merrimack game, but you weren't quite sure still what to expect from this team. And when they came back and really fought and definitely had their chances to win that game, I think it showed me the first signs that this could be a little bit of a different UConn football team than we've seen in the past, and they weren't the team that we saw go out against Maryland. I think then
Mhm.
just as the season progressed, just seeing them, especially when they played those power teams, be competitive in those games, which is something, Graham, I know we haven't seen in a long time.
No, and it doesn't matter the talent level of those teams, like you said,
Yeah,
it hasn't been good, period. Like, you play Wake Forest, which, to be honest, is probably one of the worst teams in the ACC, right? Um, but it also shows where that divide is between G5 and P4. Like I know we
yeah,
think of UConn as a power team because of all the other sports, but like, G5 can also, aside from just your conference designation, it can also refer to the kind of players that you recruit. Um, and you really see that in when you're playing these P4 teams, you really see it in the trenches.
yeah,
Certainly saw it against Wake Forest. They went from, rushing for 420 something yards against FAU just a few weeks before down to 40 against Wake. Like it's
it's a it's a
it's
difference.
a different ball game. But you know, I like the strategy. If you're gonna play power teams, play Wake Forest,
Yeah,
play Syracuse. Don't play Michigan, don't play Tennessee, don't play Ohio State, which they canceled for next year, which is smart. Uh, you know, and that's the next step for
yeah,
Connecticut is to, okay, like, yeah, we can beat the Wake Forest of the world. We would be in the bottom, whatever you want to call it, bottom fourth of the ACC or Big 12. Like that's
yeah,
where you go. And as a G5, you have such a ceiling, right? There's always a ceiling there, but
definitely.
you want to try to get as high as you can. And I think with everything that UConn has, they can be there. They can be consistently
Yeah.
fine.
No, I think you talk about the weight game. I think if that's a game that's played last year or, 2, 3 years ago, it's a game they lose by 20 probably.
Mhm.
Just to see the growth of this program. I think one thing that's probably been my favorite takeaways from this season has just been the perception change in this UConn football program. I mean, they were a perennial bottom 10, whoever does those columns for ESPN or CBS, they're always at the bottom there, called out. They were a bit of a laughing stock, a punching bag. And I think for the first time, I think you saw it to some extent the first year under Mora when they made the bowl. You started to see things turn a little bit. But I feel like, at least from my perspective, this was the first year you actually started to see a national perspective change on this UConn football program to some extent, where people are starting to recognize them and not treat them as, oh, every loss means they have to go to FCS or drop the program.
Yeah, I think that Buffalo game really did it.
Mhm.
A good, relatively speaking, for the MAC, right?
Yeah,
And wow, I mean, it wasn't even close. And then, compound that with what they did the week prior against FAU. It's
yeah,
like, okay, like they're not just like squeaking by. As much as I love that 2022 team, I've mentioned this several times. Like there's a lot of,
but
fortuitous events that season, right?
yeah,
You would catch Fresno without Jake Hayner, and they had
yup,
to fly across the country and play in an empty stadium, right? BC's missing his whole offensive line. Like Liberty's head coach is walking out the door. And,
yeah,
and you're supposed to win those games, and in the past they wouldn't. So I don't
no,
want to take
yeah,
anything away from them, but it's like this was the first season where you're like, this team like might be fine.
yeah.
That might be like an average to above average team, which is tremendous progress, all things considered. Like I even thought last year's team was probably even better than 2022, honestly, even
No,
though it's finished
I
three and
really,
nine.
yeah, I really think if you look back at the past 2 years, not including this year, I think the bounces that went their way under Jim Mora's first year just didn't go their way the second year. And
Yeah,
if you kind of even out those two teams, maybe they don't get to a bowl that first year, but they're a 4 or 5 win team, and you see similar results last year. I
which
think
is
if you
still
kind of,
better. I mean, they
yeah,
went 1-11, and I think that's what
exactly.
people were hoping for at that point. Like, just beat some of these bad teams, man. I mean, this year they beat all the bad teams.
Yeah. I think one thing as you just like are thinking back on this football program, like they were not that far removed from you mentioned the 1-win seasons, but having one of the worst defenses in all of FBS history to now a defense like you throw out there, you feel pretty confident in the defense and what they could do. What do you think of the job Matt Brock was able to do coming in year one, implementing a whole new defensive scheme and really have them performing at such a high level here?
I mean, it's just a tremendous job. Tremendous job. It's again, we take out that first game against Maryland. They're missing so many guys, and it's a brand new scheme and all that. Um, but they just got better as the season went on. And I think what made me feel best was they were plugging and playing some guys in the secondary.
Yeah.
They did well. This is a team that was supposed to have Dean Engram, who they had really, really high hopes for him transferring in from
Mhm.
Wisconsin, right? He got hurt in the preseason. Reggie Akel's another one from New Mexico State, hurt in the preseason. So now we're down to, you had Jordan Wright,
Yeah.
who, yeah, was a JUCO All-American, but also like played kind of sparingly at Kansas State. Didn't know what to really expect out of him. Damon Brinson too was getting
Yeah.
some run late in 2023, but it's like, he's also like 5'9". Like I don't know what to expect out of this guy. And
Yeah.
and they came in and played well. And I think it's a really good starting point, but they lose a ton
Yeah.
going into next season. So we're going to see how good of a defensive coordinator he really is. He has to replace, now he has to replace the whole defensive line.
Yeah.
You're replacing your linebackers, you're losing Ronte Jones. And one of the biggest ones I think that kind of just goes under the radar, but Malik Dixon Williams,
Yeah.
just consistently
I was gonna say
solid.
Mr.
Uh,
Reliable there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like he doesn't necessarily have like the big plays. Like he had that great pick against UAB. Like he's not the flashiest, but
Yeah.
like every game consistently making his tackles, good in coverage, which is really all you can ask for. So they have a lot of roles to fill. Um, Thankfully, next year they don't open with Maryland. They open with
Yeah.
Central Connecticut. So
No, I'm actually when you bring up the schedule there, I'm very excited for the past few years, especially like with trying to drive and generate some fan interest. I feel like starting with those power like higher level Power Five teams is always just a tough one there. You kind of take the wind out of the sails a little bit if you get beat up in that first one and then trying to get some enthusiasm. But you get Central, so hopefully they can take that one. Um, and go on from there. But if we look at the other side of the ball offensively, you also had a new coordinator coming in. And I'll be honest, I was a little unsure of what to expect from Gordy coming. You have the O-line coach moving up to become the offensive coordinator. It was, relatively late there. I mean, I think you saw the guy knows how to coach an O-line. This year's was great. Was able to get these holes for the running backs to really transform the running game. Overall, your thoughts on how the offense performed this season?
Yeah, I mean, most points ever, I think, in FBS era, maybe 2003 when I had Orlovsky last year as an Indy the first time around. Um, and that was with, you know, below average to average quarterback play
Yeah.
too. Um, I think fans are always hoping for a flashier offense, right? Everybody wants to see uh, you know, throwing for 300 yards and all that.
They
Uh,
want to see Joey against Merrimack every game.
yeah, exactly. And thankfully in that game, he didn't have to do all that much. He would just kind of
Yeah.
throw it out and let Skyler or let Cam or somebody just outrun the defense, which again, let's not take anything away from these guys because that
Yeah.
wasn't happening in FCS games in the past
No,
either.
no,
Like, oh,
no.
we're actually, UConn is actually more athletic and faster than this FCS team, and that's a positive
They're
because that
treating him like
was
they're
the
an
case.
FCS team. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I think they found the magic formula. It seemed like the best offensive games, honestly, were like they'd throw it like maybe 15, 16 times.
Yeah.
They'd run it 40, and that seemed to work the best.
I
Yeah,
I
so
think
you
yeah.
had the three running backs, and next year we'll be back to another. It could be four if Rosa is healthier, which I would
Mhm.
imagine he will be. Um, so I can't imagine it being crazy different, but we have to remember, like you mentioned, Gordy came in, he was announced like 3, 4 days for spring practice.
Yeah.
Really doesn't give you a lot of time to install something, right? So I'm wondering if in this offseason, he's going to take stock of what they have, um, and kind of mold this offense to who's here,
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of like let's do what we can do with what we already have. Like,
Yeah.
there are a lot fewer screens, so I don't want to say it was exactly like the Nick Charlton offense, but
Mhm.
kind of.
Yeah. Looking to add some local flavor to your lineup? Martin Rosals is the MVP of your game day spread and a slam dunk for any occasion. Proudly made in hard-hit New Britain, their famous kielbasa and hot dogs have been a fan favorite for over 96 years. You can find their products in grocery stores across the state or have them delivered directly to your home court, coast to coast, via martinrosal.com. Take your taste buds to the championship and go support a UConn fan-owned business. No, I think one thing that impressed me from an offensive standpoint, kind of midway through the season, the running game kind of hit a little bit of a wall. And it seemed like teams were prepped for the run. And they went back in the lab and I think worked on things and made some changes to get the running game back to what it looked like in those big time blowouts that they were having. So I think that's one thing that at least gave me a lot of promise to see what this offense could look like going into the future, knowing that this is a staff that could go and make some adjustments to switch things up on the fly a little bit.
Yeah, and you also got to see some guys, some guys that maybe we didn't expect to see this season. I'm thinking specifically of like Shamar Porter,
Yep.
really came up with some big catches. He kind of would catch those home run balls, and
Yeah.
you know, with TJ Sheffield leaving, right? You have a
Yep.
core now. We're still on Skylar watch
Yeah.
at time of recording here.
Yeah.
Um, you could have a wide receiving core of Skylar Bell, Shamar Porter, um, Josiah
Few
Gathings.
things. Yep.
I guess that's a really solid receiving core that they really haven't had in a very long time. Question's going to be who's going to get them the ball,
Yeah.
and that's a big question mark going
Yeah.
into spring ball.
No, I was going to say when we have you back on for preseason, we'll talk more about what the quarterback situation will look like.
Sure.
I think now it's still probably a little too early to speculate because we never know what's going to happen. There's still a lot of portal time or room for growth. See who ends up taking the reins there.
Yeah.
As you look back on this season, if you had to give me say offensive MVP and a defensive MVP, who are you going with?
Hmm. Well, I'll start with defense while I ponder over offense. Had Jaden McDonald
Yeah.
just came in and he had a torn labrum pretty much from the start of the season, right? And he did all those things that he did with one good shoulder.
Yeah. No.
Um, Obviously can't speak enough about his toughness, but he produced, man. I mean, he was fantastic. He was all over the place. He was just a shark to the ball. You love to see it. Um, and I think that his play also kind of raised the game of like other guys like Tariq
Everybody.
Aminu
Yeah.
Brown. Like it's like, oh, I got this just stud next to me. Like and then he also raises his game.
Yep.
So those would be two big guys to replace. On offense, I'm struggling, man. I'm struggling to pick between Cam and Joe.
Okay.
Um,
I was leaning Cam.
like Cam to me is also kind of like a Mr. Reliable,
Yep.
you know. But we also, you can't speak enough about like Joe Fagnano coming in off the bench and just being ready
Yeah.
all the time.
I
You
mean,
know,
you talk
he
about the UAB game right there, coming in,
yeah,
what, two-thirds of the way through the game, down and leading a nice comeback there.
right. A lot of the games, like he came in against Buffalo and he had a comfortable lead, right? And
Yeah.
which is helpful for him. And then he comes back with against Temple and found it was a little trickier when you don't have the run game
Yeah.
to lean on. That's a really nice safety to have behind you. But he got the win in that game, and he got the win in the bowl game. He gets the win at UMass. He's just the guy that, again, not the flashiest, but he was good. He was smart with the football. He's safe with the football. He didn't turn the ball over. Uh, and that's exactly what the offense needed.
Hmm. Yeah. Just kind of like thinking of through some of these like looking back type questions. Is there a play or a moment of the season for you? I know a lot of people probably will jump to the bowl win over North Carolina there. I mean, I think for me that the fumble against Temple to run it back is mine, um, the bowl one I think was huge for this program. Just that was just one of those moments where to me it kind of hit me that this is a little bit of a different UConn football team because if you're looking back at past UConn football teams, I mean it's going in the end zone.
Mhm.
They're losing the game with a second left and
Yeah.
in a game that you hoped and expected them to win. So for me that was one of those moments and just one of those exciting times, just given the touchdown return there and all that came with that. What's yours?
I looked at a few weeks after that, the Rice game,
Okay.
and Nick Evers is not playing well. He's
Yeah.
struggling big time. Um, they're just punting back and forth, right? But then Darrell breaks off this big run, like
Yeah.
68 yards, something like that, down the sideline. First play of the drive gives them a 10-3 lead, and it really felt like it was like insurmountable
Yeah, that was
at
yeah.
that point, or maybe 7-3. I can't remember if they had a field goal before or after, but gave them the lead, and it was like, wow, they've got these guys. That could have been any of them. That could have been Mel Brown.
Yep.
That could have been Cam Edwards. So it's like to me, that was a big moment because that was another game that could have really been ugly
Yeah.
and would have been a pretty disappointing loss, especially after coming off Wake Forest the week before
Yep.
and knowing you got Georgia State and UMass. And it's like, so they were 5-3 at that
Yep.
point, easily been 4-4. Could have easily been 3-5. That Temple game doesn't go
Right, exactly.
the same way too. So, that was October was a big month. Um,
Yeah, you
and it felt
had
like
the
they
nice
didn't
home
play.
stretch
It
there.
was almost like it was a great September.
Yeah.
October, you kind of felt like, okay, like they've won a few games. I don't feel great. Um, November comes along and like, oh yeah, they're good again. I think they're fine.
Yeah. No, I mean I like that one. I think that's an underrated moment there. So that's good. I'm glad we didn't have the same exact one there. So makes it a little bit more fun. As
Yeah.
you as you look to next year, what's kind of your hopes or things you're looking for this off season, from now through August?
Yeah. Well, they're obviously still working the portal.
Yep.
Um, I think spring practice will be big. It'll be, Nick Evers will be doing his first spring practice. He didn't come till the summer last year.
Yep.
So that's big for him to get ideally more comfortable with the playbook. And you know, you want to see your quarterbacks make a big leap from year one to year two. I mean, Joe certainly did. Um, from what we saw against NC State and what we saw in the first half of that Georgia State game, I mean, he came a long way. Um, so you want to see the same from Nick Evers too. Um, I think again, we'll talk more later, but I
Yeah.
think that you know, how the quarterbacks play in spring ball will determine if they go out and look for a quarterback. And that's that April portal period, similar to last year when they
Yeah.
brought in Evers. Um, and I think you're going to have the portal goes the way that I think it will. We're probably looking at about 20 new guys
Mhm.
overall. So getting them in for the spring, getting them acclimated, getting them, you know, bonded with the team, um, looking for new leaders. You don't have Jelani Stafford anymore. You don't have Chase Lunch. You don't have Valentine Sen. You
Yeah.
don't have Tui. You don't have these guys that, you know, I count Jelani in this cohort, or I should
Yeah.
say Dalmont Gordine as well. Like I count Jelani in there because he came a couple years ago and really developed here. But
Definitely.
these were all guys that were like recruited out of high school and developed through the years and stories. And like, who's next for that?
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting.
And I, off the top of my head right now, I couldn't tell you, but that doesn't mean that there aren't good dudes in that locker room that can do so. Um, but you're going to want to see that who will continue on with the culture that they've built
Yeah.
and just who gets better this offseason. Like that's because guys are going to have to, you know, the UConn is a program that can't go out and get like a top offensive lineman out of the portal. So who's been on the bench that's ready to step up?
Yeah, no, I think we've got a lot of interesting off-season items to take a look at with this team as we think about it. I'll got a couple just to wrap here, but you look back at the bowl win. Obviously, you get the great crowd at Fenway for that. I mean, for me, that was just like just sitting there, just like I can't believe this is actually happening for UConn football because I feel like it was the moment that everything has been building up to over the past decade. And I know there are naysayers out there. Oh, UNC's playing backups because of
Who
opt-outs, and
cares? Who
yeah,
cares?
exactly. That's
They
exactly my thoughts on that.
should have
For
kept
me,
their starters, not my problem.
yeah, exactly. For me, it was just like one of those like just breakthrough moments where you're like, like here it is. Like it's the culmination of everything we've been sitting through in cold and rain, watching them get the crap beaten out of them at the rent. Here you are at Fenway with 25,000 probably UConn fans out of 27,000 there,
Yeah,
and everyone's just all in on this team, and you could see it in the guys too out there that it really meant something to them.
absolutely. You know, again, like I said earlier in the show, like there are limitations, there's ceilings to what they can be.
Yeah,
They can, I guess, technically be in the college football playoff if they go 12 and 0. I'm guessing
sure.
their strength of schedule wouldn't allow that, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it's technically a possibility.
Yeah,
You know, they don't have a conference championship to play for. Um, and we know that UConn, first and foremost, is a basketball school, and I don't envision that ever changing. But doesn't mean they can't have a solid, respectable football program. And I think if this is what they can be consistently year in, year out,
yeah,
um, I think that's great. That's great for the university. It gives them it gives people something to be excited about in the fall. It kind of wraps up. I mean, the home schedule this year literally was the weekend before
for
the
basketball.
first basketball game, you know, and that's not going to happen all the time, but
Yeah,
it's a good like I'm going to focus on basketball, but I'm also going to keep in the back of my mind like football is still going and there's bowls and I'm going to go to this bowl. Um, and I'm
it
still going to be interested in it as opposed to just like something to, you know, I'll go once and drink a lot in the parking lot with my
go
friends,
go home.
maybe
Yeah,
seeing the game if you know they're down 30, I want to go home. Like, you know, it's
yeah. No, I agree. When you think about it too, especially with the way the schedule's worked out this year, having a 10-day basketball layoff, uh, and having the bowl smack dab in the middle was a
mm,
lifesaver in terms of the sports schedule there. I know for a lot of people
yeah, I think there would have been a lot of people who been like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what
that
to do
go
with
and
my
stir
hands and my
crazy in the
feet. I don't
house.
know.
You've been around family all holidays. You want to like get out and do something, so you had a game
Yeah.
there that it got you to. I'll end with this one. For me personally, when they went out and brought in Jim Mora, it like signaled to me that they were really still trying to make a serious investment in this program. And in spite of everyone saying that they should be giving up on it, I mean, Jim Mora's a legitimate coach, legitimate name, and you've seen what he's done now over 3 years. He gets the extension that's announced the day of the bowl game. I mean, to me, it's just fantastic news, and I think really good for the future of this program, especially for a guy who, if he wanted to go, probably could go somewhere else with opportunities that arise at some point or another through the coaching carousel. How big do you think it is to continue this run with Coach Mora here, and knowing that they've extended him and have him for some more time here?
It's great for recruiting continuity.
Yeah.
You look at, I think a program that's probably most similar is like Temple.
Hmm.
And every time Temple had a really good season, they'd lose a coach.
Yeah.
And they've made a lot of really good hires, but it's really hard to make
Yeah.
good college football hires. And you see where they're at right now. So to be able to keep Coach Mora, it's huge. It's a young staff,
Hmm.
and so far there's just one defection in quarterbacks coach Brad Robbins
Yeah.
going to Tulsa, and I think that says a lot about um, A, working for Coach Mora, and B, what UConn can provide as far as like an assistant pool goes and salary. Like it's
Yeah.
it's it's attractive. Like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna stay. This is actually a good thing I have going on. Like,
I mean,
I was
Matt Brock.
shocked to not see Matt Brock's name.
Yeah.
Not even like maybe not as a head coach yet, but like anyone who had a P4 defensive coordinator. I mean, and he had one. He was at Mississippi State, and
Exactly.
like he went in and fixed this UConn defense. Like I was shocked, but
That's the name that if you could keep a guy like that around here who's an SEC guy with that background, and you keep him here at UConn. I mean, I think that's a big feather in the cap of Jim Mora and the whole athletic department for being able to show that they're serious about football here.
yeah, but there's just so much to learn from him. I mean, between him and his father and all
Yeah.
the NFL pedigree, there's really a lot to learn as a young coach and as a player as well. So we get another 3 years, I guess 4 years because it goes through 2028.
28. Yep.
I don't, who's to say what happens after that? He is in his
Right.
60s.
Yeah.
He might be he might be ready to finally retire and relax, and he would have earned it at that point. Uh, but just really good because you want to keep some level of momentum. You don't want to have a transfer portal exodus and
Hmm.
he goes somewhere, say he takes
Yeah.
like the Washington State job, just not far from where he lives in the off season in Idaho. Like how many players would leave? And we've
Hmm.
seen in the past a lot.
Yeah.
And
Decimate the roster there. Yeah.
we think back to Edsel the second time around, and granted he wouldn't use the portal, but UConn was losing almost entire recruiting classes to the portal, and
Yeah.
you saw the results, right? So just being able to keep a good portion of the roster intact.
And I lied. I said I was going to wrap with that one, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up what we had the other day in terms of Jim Mora and tweeting out about some tampering
Yeah,
allegations. I mean, I love seeing him call it out. I mean, I think everyone who's even just been a casual UConn football fan now is like fully behind Jim Mora in this program now after this season. You get that to keep the and I don't want to say because it's momentum because it really isn't keeping momentum, but like just keeping the UConn football name out there and in going. I mean, what are your thoughts just when you saw that going on? I forget what day it even was. All these days blend together from
I think it
Christmas
was
through New
Sunday.
Year's, but
Honestly, it was like the day after,
yeah,
or at least Monday. I
Monday
mean,
maybe. Yeah,
look, it happens. It happens all the time. Um, if you're on Storrs Central in the forums, like you'll see
yeah,
like, hey, like this stuff's out there all the time. Um, and Jamora is in a unique position because he has no conference.
yeah,
There's nobody to reel him in. So if he wants to remount the officials after the game, he can do so. He has no fellow conference mates to upset.
yeah.
Um, I'd be curious to see who this team is. And I have heard some theories, and I am not putting it out into the public. Um, if the young man he was talking about commits there, then I will
Then we'll all know.
know. Then we will know for sure. Um, but I'd be surprised to know who it is because you also have to think you don't want to upset potential future conference mates also,
Yep.
right? If it's an ACC team, if it's a Big 12 team,
Yeah.
right? And then you have 3 more years of this. And I said, okay, we'll give you kind of a shot. You don't want to walk in and be like, hey guys,
Yeah.
remember me? I was the one who called you out by name. You remember? Like,
Yeah.
you don't want that to happen. So uh interested to see, but someone has to do it, man. Like it's
Yeah.
just it happens all the time. And the NCAA really, the way that it's set up right now, there's nothing to be done about it. There aren't contracts, there aren't anything, and it's like guys can jump in, they can jump back out, and they can transfer without penalty, which I'm largely in support of. But it's
There needs to be
a
some
tough
level of
look when you
organization.
go in and then be like make a big thing about coming back out, and I'm going to
Yeah.
return to school, and then it's like psych. Actually, no, I'm not. Um, and I think that Coach Mora is so supportive of players
I
acting in their own interests and at least seeing what's out there. Um,
what
and
other
I think
coach
he's really upset.
what other coach out there is like tweeting praise of guys who have entered the portal, being like, "Hey, coaches, hit me up if you've got questions on this guy," or hyping up the player for what they've done for UConn. I mean, you don't see that. So when he took that stance the other day, you knew it had to be something serious that really got to him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. He's not the kind of guy that is going to um, be negative about, be disappointed in someone for just doing their own due diligence,
Yeah.
right? And and they're going to give guys advice. They're going to be like, yes, and you're going to go out there, but I don't think you're going to get what you're looking for,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And everyone's reasons for going to the portal are different.
Yep.
It's sometimes it's a mutual thing. Like it's just you're going to be buried on a depth chart here. I'd advise you, if you
Yeah.
want to keep playing, to go somewhere else. It could also be they're not a culture fit, locker room fit kind of thing, and they're not encouraged. They're basically voluntold, like you got to go.
Yeah.
Can't make you go, but you should go,
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? Um, so yeah, I'm overall though, I'm happy to see him do it. I hope other coaches kind of see that and feel empowered to do so themselves. Um, but until there's some governing body that wants to put some rules down on this, it's going
Yeah.
to continue to happen. So
Wild West still. So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Well, we'll see what happens over the next few weeks here as this all plays out. I forget exactly when the portal closes, but
It
what they
technically
get 5 days
closed.
after the bowl game. So
Yeah. So for teams that weren't in bowls, it closed Saturday night, like 11:59 p.m. after the
okay,
bowl. But teams playing after that date or playing bowls that day, they have 5 days
okay,
after. So we're not out of the woods yet, but getting close.
yeah, yeah. I think tomorrow. We're recording this Wednesday night, so I think tomorrow would be it. So right, because it was Saturday,
Yeah,
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
yeah. End
Thursday.
of end
So
of tomorrow. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So hopefully we get some conclusions here sooner than later. But Graham, always appreciate getting to chat UConn football with you. If you're not following Graham and looking at Storrs Central for all the coverage there, it's fantastic and a lot going on the forums. You want to be a part of the forums if you have any interest in UConn football.
Yeah, I agree. We have a lot of recruiting news going on in the forums. There are things that kind of had to be in the forums because they can't be put out there like through articles and whatnot.
Yeah,
So, if you're on Store Central and you feel like you're missing something, feel free to reach out. Like, hey, where do I look for this? If you're not part of Store Central, can't recommend it enough. I feel like we have a lot of guys that put out some really good content.
yeah,
And it's another way to support our UConn student athletes. So
definitely.
uh, please check it out if you haven't. And if you want to follow me, I mean, you can look me up on Twitter, Pawsarf, PAWSARF blog. Uh, my full name's on there. Come find me, yell at me if you don't like me or whatever. But
Right. When you get
say
upset
what's up.
about quarterback decisions next year, I know Graham loves it when you tweet him about the quarterback. So if you want to do it in the off season, just do it whenever. But Graham, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.